Becky was a dedicated and compassionate doctor, known in the hospital for her unwavering commitment to her patients. From a young age, she had found in medicine not only a profession, but a calling. Her passion for helping others made her stand out among her colleagues. However, this same commitment to her work often kept her away from home and from her beloved husband, Alex. Alex and Becky shared a deep and sincere love. Alex had always been her rock, supporting her unconditionally in every step of her career. Despite the long hours Becky spent at the hospital, their relationship remained strong. They both dreamed of starting a family, but the hectic pace of Becky's life had delayed those plans. Alex, always understanding, never pressured her. He knew how much her work meant to her and respected her dedication. One day, while Becky was in the middle of her shift, an emergency broke the usual routine of the hospital. The sound of sirens and the commotion in the emergency room announced the arrival of a serious case. Becky prepared to receive the patient, expecting the unexpected, as always. But nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to face. The patient, lying on the stretcher, was Alex. The shock of seeing him there, bloodied and unconscious, was like a stab in Becky's heart. The paramedic's words echoed in her mind. Car accident. Driver lost control. Reality crumbled around her as she struggled to remain calm. "Oh my God, it's my husband," Becky could barely whisper, terror and despair clouding her judgment. She wanted to throw herself on him, do everything she could to save him, but the hospital's policies were clear. She couldn't treat an immediate family member. Helplessness washed over her as Dylan, her trusted colleague, took control of the situation. "Becky, I need you to step away. We'll handle it," Dylan said firmly but gently, aware of his friend's pain. Becky stood paralyzed, forced to watch from a distance as Dylan and his team worked frantically to save Alex. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Her mind was flooded with memories of their life together, from the early days of their relationship to the happiest moments they had shared. Every beat of her heart was a desperate cry for a miracle. The hours passed, and the operating room door finally opened. Dylan came out, his face covered in sweat, and with an expression that Becky couldn't immediately interpret. Her heart pounded, clinging to a fragile hope. "Dylan, please tell me he'll be okay," Becky pleaded, her voice trembling. Dylan shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "Becky, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but his injuries were too severe. Alex didn't make it." Becky's world shattered at that moment. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into a chair, unable to contain her sobs. Grief enveloped her, a pain so deep it was hard to breathe. Her colleagues tried to comfort her, but nothing could alleviate the agony of losing her beloved husband. She felt empty, as if a part of her had died with him. In the weeks that followed, Becky was a shadow of her former self. The vibrant and passionate doctor was now consumed by sadness. Life went on around her, but Becky felt trapped in a limbo of pain and despair. Her friends and colleagues supported her, but she sank deeper and deeper into her sorrow. The passion for her work was fading, replaced by an emptiness that seemed insurmountable. The loss of Alex was an open wound that would take a long time to heal, and the doctor who had once saved so many lives now found herself lost, desperately searching for a reason to go on. The sound of the heart monitor that had once been so comforting to Becky now felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Since Alex's death, the hospital, her refuge, had been transformed into a prison of painful memories. Every hallway, every emergency room brought back some moment shared with him. The joy she once felt in helping others had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. "Becky, are you okay?" asked Sarah, one of her closest colleagues, seeing her lost in thought while reviewing a patient's chart. "Yeah, just a little tired," Becky replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The truth was that she hadn't had a decent night's sleep since the accident. Nightmares haunted her, constantly reminding her of the tragic loss of Alex. As the days turned into weeks, Becky realized that her grief would not fade easily. She tried to keep up with her routine, seeking solace in the work she once loved. But every task, every interaction with patients, felt empty and meaningless. The passionate and dedicated doctor everyone knew was disappearing, replaced by a shadow of her former self. "Doctor, we need your help in the ER," a nurse told her. Becky nodded and headed towards the room, but her mind was elsewhere. The voices of her colleagues mingled with the hum of the fluorescent lights, and Alex's face appeared around every corner. Once, Becky had been known for her empathy and ability to connect with patients. Now, she struggled to hold basic conversations. During one consultation, an elderly patient took her hand and said, "Dear, you seem to have the weight of the world on your shoulders. Don't let it consume you." Becky could only nod, fighting back tears. Life went on around her, but she felt trapped in a limbo of pain and despair. Her support, Alex, was no longer there to hold her, and she didn't know how to move on without him. Her friends and colleagues at the hospital tried to help her. Sarah, in particular, made sure Becky wasn't alone during lunch breaks and organized small gatherings to lift her spirits. "Remember that patient who insisted his cat could predict the weather? I always thought we should have listened to him," Sarah would say, trying to make her laugh. "Yes, I remember," Becky would reply with a weak smile. She appreciated Sarah's efforts, but the emptiness inside her kept growing. Dylan, the surgeon who had tried to save Alex, was also worried about Becky. One day, he found her sitting alone in the break room, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. "Becky, you need to take some time for yourself. You can't go on like this," he told her gently. "I can't, Dylan. This job is all I have left," Becky replied, her voice breaking. "We're all here for you, but you need to take care of yourself first," Dylan insisted. "Take a few days off, talk to someone. You don't have to carry this alone." Becky knew he was right, but the thought of leaving the hospital terrified her. However, she finally accepted that she needed help. With the support of her colleagues, she decided to take a week off. During that time, Becky allowed herself to feel her grief. She cried for Alex, for the dreams they would never fulfill, and for the life that would never be the same. The nights were the worst when the silence of her apartment became deafening. She clung to the few belongings of Alex's she still kept, seeking some kind of comfort. One afternoon, Sarah visited her with a box of photographs. "I thought we could remember the good times together," she suggested, and Becky, for the first time in weeks, felt a small ray of light in the darkness that surrounded her. They spent hours looking through photos, recalling the laughter and happy moments. Becky realized that, although the pain was immense, there was also beauty in the memories she shared with Alex. Their love was not gone. It lived on in every smile, in every embrace, captured in those images. The week off gave Becky the perspective she needed. Returning to work wouldn't be easy, but she knew she wasn't alone. With the support of her friends and colleagues, she was determined to honor Alex's memory by continuing the work they both loved. Becky understood that her pain would not disappear, but she could learn to live with it, finding strength in the memories and in the love she would always carry in her heart. The metallic sound of the subway doors closing marked the beginning and end of each workday for Becky. She used to find in that commute a moment of disconnection, a pause between the frenzy of the hospital and the tranquility of her home. Lately, however, that trip had become a constant source of anxiety. One afternoon, as she settled into her usual seat, Becky felt a stare on her. She looked up and her eyes met those of a middle-aged man sitting across the car. He wore ordinary clothes, nothing that stood out at first glance, but the intensity of his gaze made her shudder. She tried to look away, focusing on the book she had with her. However, the feeling of being watched was too strong to ignore. She looked back, and the man was still there, staring at her without blinking. Becky felt a chill run down her spine. Maybe it's just a coincidence, she thought, trying to reassure herself. The next day, the scenario repeated itself. She got on the subway, found her seat, and there he was, in the same spot, with the same fixed gaze. Becky began to feel a growing anxiety. It can't be a coincidence, she murmured to herself. The discomfort turned into a knot in her stomach. As the days passed, the man's presence on the subway became a disturbing constant. It didn't matter what time she took the train, he was always there, watching her. Becky's routine was altered by paranoia and fear. At the hospital, her colleagues noticed her distraction and concern. But she did not share her concerns. She felt that her fears were irrational, perhaps the result of stress and the accumulated pain of losing Alex. "Becky, are you okay?" Sarah asked her colleague and friend. "You seem very distracted lately." "Yeah, it's just work," Becky replied, trying to deflect the conversation. She didn't want to admit that she felt harassed by a stranger on the subway. "I just need some rest, that's all." But rest wasn't enough. The man wasn't just on the subway. Becky began to feel his presence even outside of those rides. Walking to the hospital or back home, she felt eyes on her, a constant and oppressive presence. Every time she turned to check, she saw no one, but the feeling persisted, eroding her peace of mind. One night, after a long day at the hospital, Becky decided to take a different route home, hoping to evade that feeling of being watched. She walked down less traveled streets, alert to every shadow and every movement, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. Upon reaching her apartment, she almost ran to the door, quickly closing it behind her. Her heart was pounding, fear taking over. She collapsed onto the couch, taking deep breaths to calm down. The feeling of being watched would not leave her alone. Every sound, every creak in her apartment was amplified in her mind. She felt trapped, unable to escape that constant oppression. "This can't go on," she thought, but she didn't know what to do. Talking to the police seemed like an overreaction. What would she tell them? "A man is looking at me on the subway and I feel like he's following me." It sounded ridiculous even to her. Lack of sleep and accumulated stress began to seriously affect her. At the hospital, her performance suffered, and her colleagues were increasingly concerned. One day, Dylan approached her in the break room. "Becky, you have to take care of yourself. We're all worried about you," he said, his voice full of genuine concern. "I know, Dylan. I just need to find a way to handle this," she replied, not wanting to go into details. She didn't want to appear weak or paranoid. Becky had tried to resume her daily life, but the feeling of being watched haunted her constantly. No matter how hard she tried, the fear wouldn't leave her alone. Every day on the subway, that unknown man followed her with his gaze. Her anxiety increased with each encounter, but she never imagined that the situation would come to a head so soon. One night, as she was finishing her shift at the hospital, Becky felt a chill run down her spine as she walked out of the building. The cool night air did little to calm her growing sense of alarm. She walked towards her apartment with quick steps, constantly looking over her shoulder, hoping not to find the man. But her worst fears were realized when, upon reaching her door, she saw him there, waiting. The man, with even more disheveled clothes than before and a look of despair on his face, stood in front of her. Becky felt the immediate urge to call the police, but her body froze. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The man opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, his legs buckled and he collapsed unconscious to the floor. "Oh my God!" Becky exclaimed, her medical instincts kicking in instantly. With no time to think about her own safety, she knelt beside him and checked his vital signs. His pulse was weak, but he was alive. With considerable effort, she managed to drag him into her apartment and placed him on the couch. Becky ran for her first aid kit and began to assess his condition. "Come on, hold on," she murmured to herself as she worked. Her mind was racing with questions and fears, but she knew she had to stay focused. In the midst of her frenzy, memories of Alex flooded her mind. The helplessness she had felt at losing him, the desperation of not being able to save the person she loved more than anything. It all came back with overwhelming force. As she treated the man, whose skin was cold and pale, Becky couldn't help but think about the cruelty of fate. She had lost Alex without being able to do anything, and now she had the opportunity to save a stranger who terrified her. The paradox of the situation left her with a bittersweet feeling. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the man began to show signs of recovery. His eyes opened slowly, and Becky helped him sit up, offering him a glass of water. "Drink slowly," she said, her voice softer than she expected. The man drank with difficulty and then looked at her gratefully. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse and weak. "Who are you and why are you following me?" asked Becky, trying to keep her tone firm despite the confusion and fear that flooded her. "I'm David," replied the man, breathing heavily. "We met at the hospital. My father, you were the only one who treated us with kindness." Becky frowned, trying to remember. She treated so many patients that faces often faded from her memory. "Your father?" "No, I don't remember you." David nodded slowly, as if the explanation cost him every ounce of energy. "My father is very sick. We need help, and I didn't know who else to turn to. I saw you on the subway, and I thought you could help us." David's revelation hit Becky like a wave. She vaguely remembered an older man she had treated months ago, someone who had needed care that the hospital could not provide. "Oh my God, yes, I think I remember," she said, feeling a lump in her throat. "But why didn't you come to the hospital? Why did you follow me home?" "I didn't know how to find help," David replied, his voice barely a whisper. "We have no money, no insurance. You were the only one who showed us any compassion. I was desperate." Becky felt a mixture of compassion and determination. She knew what it was like to feel despair, and she couldn't let another human being suffer if it was in her power to prevent it. "It's okay. I'll help you," she said finally, her voice firm. "But you need to rest and regain your strength. Tomorrow, we'll see how I can help your father." David nodded gratefully, his eyes filled with tears. Becky settled him on the couch, covering him with a blanket. David sat on the couch, still recovering from the previous night's collapse. Becky moved around the small apartment, making tea as she tried to process everything that had happened. The morning light streamed softly through the curtains, creating a tranquil atmosphere that contrasted with Becky's inner turmoil. "Thank you for letting me stay here," David said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, laden with gratitude and despair. "It's okay," Becky replied, handing him a cup of hot tea. "Now, tell me exactly what's wrong with your father." David sighed deeply before he began to speak. "My father has a rare disease that affects his nervous system. We've been to several hospitals, but the treatment he needs is experimental and very expensive. We don't have insurance that covers it, and every time we try to get help, we're turned away." David's words were painfully familiar to Becky. As she listened to him, her mind filled with memories of Alex. She remembered the moment she saw her husband on the stretcher, the helplessness she felt at not being able to save him. The desperation in David's eyes mirrored her own in those dark days. "I understand," Becky said, her voice trembling slightly. "I lost my husband in a car accident a few months ago. It was one of the most difficult moments of my life. I felt like the world was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to save him." David looked at her sympathetically. "I'm so sorry, Becky. I can't imagine the pain you've been through." "It's something I struggle with every day," Becky admitted. "But your situation reminds me of how I felt then. I couldn't save Alex, but maybe I can do something for your father." As Becky spoke, the memories continued to flood her mind. She remembered how she sat outside the emergency room, waiting, praying for a miracle that never came. She remembered the moment Dylan walked out, his face grim, the world crumbling around her when she learned that Alex had not survived. The helplessness and pain had consumed her ever since, but hearing David's story awakened something in her. A spark of determination that had been extinguished since Alex's loss. "I'm going to help you," Becky said with more conviction. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way." David nodded, his eyes filled with hope. "Thank you, Becky. I don't know what we would do without you." Becky stood up and started searching through her contacts on her phone. She called several colleagues, explaining David and his father's situation. Each call was a small step forward, each refusal a reminder of the cruel reality of the healthcare system. But Becky did not give up. The image of Alex in her mind, his voice telling her to always fight for what is right, spurred her on. As she made the calls, David watched silently. He admired Becky's determination, her ability to keep going despite the obvious pain in her eyes. To him, Becky was more than just a doctor. She was a warrior, someone willing to fight against adversity for a noble cause. Becky hung up the phone after another unsuccessful call and turned to David. "I have some contacts that might be able to help us, but it will take time." David nodded. "I understand. I appreciate everything you're doing." "It's not enough," said Becky, with a mixture of frustration and determination. "But I'm not giving up. We have to explore all the options." Becky woke up early, determined to find the help that David and his father needed. She had spent the night researching and making a list of contacts who might be able to offer some kind of medical support. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to face all obstacles. The image of Alex was always with her, giving her strength to carry on. "We're going to try this," she told herself as she dialed the first number on her list. The call was short and frustrating. "I'm sorry, Becky, but we don't have the resources for that kind of experimental treatment," said her colleague on the other end of the line. Becky hung up the phone, trying not to get discouraged. The next few calls were similar. Each rejection was a blow to her determination, but she was not ready to give up. After several hours of rejections, she decided to take a break and visit David and his father. When she arrived at David's small apartment, she found him in the kitchen, making tea. "Hi, Becky," he said, trying to smile. "Dad is resting a little better today." "I'm glad to hear that," Becky replied. "I'm going to check on him." She entered the room where David's father lay in a single bed. His face showed signs of pain, but also a slight improvement thanks to Becky's constant care. She took his hand and spoke to him softly. "Hello, Mr. Martinez. How are you feeling today?" "Better, thanks to you, Doctor," he replied weakly. "I don't know what we would do without you." Becky smiled at him, though inside she felt frustrated that she couldn't do more. She administered his painkillers, and checked his vital signs. Then she sat down beside the bed and they chatted for a while about trivial matters, trying to relieve some of the emotional burden on both of them. David entered the room, watching Becky gratefully. "Thank you for being here, Becky. I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing." "You don't have to thank me, David," she said, standing up. "We're in this together." As she continued her search for help, Becky continued to visit David and his father daily. Each visit was a reminder of the love and dedication she had felt for Alex. The relationship between the three of them grew stronger with each passing day, creating a deep and meaningful bond. One day, while administering the usual care, David sat down next to her. "How's the search for help going?" he asked, trying to stay hopeful. "I've had some rejections, but I'm not giving up," Becky replied. "Today, I spoke to an organization that might be interested in helping. It's not a promise, but it's a start." David nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude and weariness. "It's more than we could have hoped for. Thank you, Becky." The conversation drifted towards personal memories. Becky spoke of Alex, of his love for life, and his kind nature. David shared stories about his father, about how he used to be before the illness. A strong man full of energy. "My father always said that life is a gift, even in the most difficult moments," David said, looking at his father tenderly. "I think he's right." Becky nodded, feeling a deep connection to those words. Alex used to say something similar. Sometimes it's hard to see it that way, but I think those difficult moments show us how strong we can be. Thursday dawned with a storm that seemed to reflect Becky's mood. The grey clouds and constant rain made everything feel heavier. Weeks had passed since she started looking for help for David's father, facing rejection after rejection. Despite her best efforts, David's father's health had worsened considerably. That morning, Becky prepared to visit David and his father, her heart heavy with worry and a knot in her stomach. She knew she had to give them bad news, something she hated to do. She got in the car and drove through the rain, her mind filled with dark thoughts about the lack of options and dwindling time. When she arrived at the apartment, David greeted her with a tired smile. "Hi, Becky. Come in, please." Becky entered and left her wet coat by the door. "David, I need to talk to you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. They sat down in the small living room, and Becky took a breath before continuing. "I've done everything I could, but I haven't found help to cover the costs of your father's treatment. The answers have been negative everywhere I've called." David nodded, his face reflecting resignation and pain. "I understand, Becky. You've done more than we could have asked for. I don't know how to thank you." Before Becky could answer, the ringing of a phone broke the tense silence. David got up and answered the call. Becky noticed a change in his expression as he spoke. David hung up and turned to her, his eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and emotion. "Becky, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I just got a call from a reporter. Our story has been in the news. It seems that someone from the hospital commented on it, and it reached the media." Becky looked at him in surprise. "What? How is that possible?" "The reporter said that our situation has moved many people. In fact, an anonymous donor has offered to cover all the costs of my father's treatment." David's words echoed through the room, filling it with renewed hope. Becky felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "That's incredible," she said, barely believing what she was hearing. "This changes everything." David hugged her, unable to hold back the tears. "Becky, thank you. None of this would have been possible without you." Becky smiled, feeling the weight on her shoulders lighten. It's a miracle, David. Now we have to make sure your father gets the best possible treatment. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The news of the donor's generosity and Becky's dedication spread quickly. Becky's colleagues at the hospital were inspired by her commitment and began to offer their help. David's father was immediately admitted to receive the necessary treatment. Every day, Becky personally supervised David's father's progress, making sure he received the best care. Although the road to recovery would be long, hope had been restored. One day, while reviewing medical reports, one of her colleagues approached her. "Becky, your dedication has been an inspiration to all of us," he said. "We want to help you cover some of the additional costs that may arise. You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." Becky was overwhelmed by the offer. "Thank you. That means a lot to me," she replied, touched by the unexpected support. David's father began to show signs of improvement, and although there were difficult days, progress was evident. Becky and David spent many hours together, talking about the future and their plans for when his father was better. The connection between them grew stronger, forged in the midst of adversity. One rainy day, similar to the Thursday when hope was reborn, Becky received a call from the hospital. "Becky, we need to talk to you," said the doctor on the other end of the line. The serious tone made her fear the worst. Upon arriving at the hospital, she was met by a group of doctors. "We wanted to inform you that, thanks to your efforts and the proper treatment, David's father has shown a significant recovery. We believe he will soon be discharged." Becky felt tears welling up in her eyes. The struggle, the pain, and the nights of uncertainty had been worth it. "Thank you. Thank you all," she said, her voice breaking. David's father's surgery was a success. Becky watched from the hospital waiting room, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to remain calm. Nerves were inevitable, but confidence in the medical team and the experimental treatment kept her going. After hours that seemed eternal, the surgeon came out with a reassuring smile. "Everything went well," he said, looking at Becky and David. "The surgery was a success." Becky breathed a sigh of relief, and David hugged her tightly. "Thank God," he murmured, feeling a huge weight lifted from his shoulders. The following days were crucial. Becky dedicated every free moment to caring for David's father. Her visits to the hospital were constant, making sure he received the best possible care and supervising every step of the recovery process. The relationship between them deepened, and Becky's dedication became evident to all. David's father, although weak after surgery, was showing signs of improvement. The first few days were difficult, but his spirit remained strong. Becky made sure he took his medications on time and encouraged him to keep going. "He is making remarkable progress," the doctor told Becky during one of her visits, "but there is still a long way to go." "I know," Becky replied, "but we are ready to face it." The experimental treatment began, and each day brought new challenges and small victories. Becky was there for every one of them, administering medications, monitoring vital signs, and providing emotional support. David's father's recovery was gradual but steady. One day, while Becky was reviewing his medications, David's father looked at her gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you, Becky. You've been an angel to us." "You don't have to thank me," she said, smiling. "We're in this together." As the weeks passed, Becky's visits to the hospital became more than just medical care. She would stay to chat, share stories, and listen to the experiences of David and his father. The conversations became more personal and meaningful, creating a bond of friendship that went beyond the doctor-patient relationship. "I remember when I used to take David fishing," David's father said one day with a nostalgic smile. "Those were good times." "Yes, Dad. David replied, smiling. Even though we never caught anything, it was always fun. Becky joined the conversation, sharing anecdotes from her own childhood and her life with Alex. Laughter filled the room, creating an atmosphere of warmth and camaraderie that helped everyone cope with the situation. David's father's progress continued to improve. Months passed, and the transition from intensive care to gradual recovery was evident. Each small improvement was celebrated as a major achievement. Becky felt more connected to them, finding in this new family a reason to move on after the loss of Alex. The daily visits became part of her routine. Although she still monitored David's father's health, their encounters became less formal. Becky would bring books, board games, and sometimes prepare home-cooked meals to share with them. David's house, once a place of illness and despair, was transformed into a home filled with hope and joy. One day, while sharing a meal, David looked at Becky and said, "You've done more than just care for my father. You've given us hope and joy in the midst of darkness." "I just did what I could," Becky replied humbly. "But you have given me a lot too. You have reminded me of the importance of hope and the strength of the human spirit." David's father, in a stronger voice than he had in months, added, "You are part of our family now, Becky. We couldn't have done it without you." Becky felt a warmth in her heart, knowing that she had found a new purpose. The loss of Alex would always be a part of her, but helping David and his father had given her a new reason to go on. She had transformed her pain into a source of strength and hope for others. As the treatment continued and David's father's health continued to improve, Becky realized that her visits were not just out of duty. She enjoyed their company, the conversations, and the bond they had formed. She had found a new family, one that had emerged from adversity and struggle, and which was now sustained by love and friendship. The sun shone softly through the curtains, illuminating the small apartment that now felt like home to Becky, David, and his father. The atmosphere was peaceful and filled with a sense of accomplishment. It had been months since the experimental treatment began, and David's father's improvement was remarkable. Every day his health grew stronger, and with it, the bond between the three of them grew deeper. "Do you remember when all this started?" David asked, looking at Becky as they sat down to breakfast. "We were so desperate. It feels like a miracle to be here now." Becky smiled, nodding in agreement. "Yes, it was a very difficult time, but we got through it together. I never thought I would find so much support and friendship in the midst of so much pain." David's father, now much more cheerful and with more color in his face, added, "We didn't just find a doctor in you, Becky. We found a friend, a family. Your visits were what kept me going every day." "And you gave me a reason to keep going," Becky said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "After losing Alex, I was so lost. Helping you has given me a new purpose, a way to transform my pain into something positive." David looked at his father and then at Becky. "We have learned so much from you, Becky. Your dedication, your compassion, you showed us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope." The apartment was filled with memories of their journey together. The walls now held photos of happy moments. David's father smiling during one of his hospital visits, the three of them sharing a home-cooked meal and moments of laughter and camaraderie. These memories were testaments to their struggle and the small victories they had accumulated over time. "I am so grateful for everything," Becky continued. "You have helped me heal, to find a way to move on without Alex." David took Becky's hand and squeezed it gently. "And we are grateful for you. We couldn't have made it this far without your support and dedication." David's father, with a warm smile, added, "You are an essential part of our family now, Becky. You will always have a place in our hearts and in our home." Becky felt a surge of emotion and gratitude. She had found a new family in the midst of her grief, and this connection had transformed her profoundly. The loss of Alex would always be a part of her, but now she had a way to honor his memory through the love and compassion she shared with David and his father. As the day progressed, they prepared for a small celebration. They had invited a few friends and colleagues who had been part of their journey. The house was filled with laughter and lively conversation, a celebration of life and the love they had found together. "This is just the beginning," Becky said as she raised her glass in a toast, "to what we have achieved and all that is to come. Thank you for being part of this incredible journey." Everyone raised their glasses, toasting the future and the bonds they had formed. Becky looked around, feeling filled with a peace she had not known in a long time. She had found a new chapter in her life, one that was full of promise and hope. As night fell and the guests said their goodbyes, Becky, David, and his father sat together once more. The warmth of their company was a reminder of how much they had grown and the strength they had found in their connection. "We will always be a family," said David's father, taking Becky and David's hands. "This bond we share is a testament to kindness and the human spirit." "Yes," Becky replied, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "We are a family, and we always will be." They had transformed their pain and despair into a source of strength and hope. Together, they had shown that even in the darkest of times, there is always a path to the light. Becky stood up and looked out the window, gazing at the stars that twinkled in the night sky. She knew that Alex was there somehow, smiling and proud of what she had accomplished. And with that certainty, she prepared to face the future, confident that anything was possible when you had the support and love of a family. And that's how determination and compassion can change lives. The story of Becky, David, and his father is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a spark of hope. If you've been touched by this story as much as I have, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends and family. Subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our inspiring and emotional stories. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, and remember, every little act of kindness counts. See you soon.